You are listening to the I Choose My Best Life podcast with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, a show that is dedicated to helping you live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally. For additional resources, visit ichoosemybestlife.com.
How can you keep your energy, happiness, creativity, and relationships fresh and thriving in the midst of never-ending family demands, career pressures, and the stress of everyday life? Learn about best-selling book Sacred Rest and discover the 7 types of rest you need most by visiting restquiz.com.
Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Saundra, and you're listening to I Choose My Best Life. Today, I'm chatting with Melissa Llarena. She is a best-selling author of the book Fertile Imagination and an imagination coach. And I know so often it's hard to see yourself as someone who is creative and who has a wonderful imagination, who's able to really tap into new mysteries and new ways of being and doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing how Melissa approaches this topic and can help us get to being the best version of ourselves through the better use of our imagination. So I want to begin, Melissa, with having you just share a little bit about why is this a topic that you even became interested in?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Saundra. I'm thrilled to be here on this side of the mic. You were on the Mom Founder Imagination Hub some time ago. So let's see, what is it that got me excited about using my imagination? I will say that if you look at my resume, it's very analytical. I have my business degree. I studied psychology, and I cannot say that much credit was given to the use of coming up with ideas in situations where I had no idea what to do or how to press forward. And really thinking back when I was using my imagination in its fullest, it was as a little girl. As a lot of listeners, I'm sure, would recall, pretending to be this or that, or tea parties and all that jazz. And for me, my imagination was always this like escape. I was raised by a mom that was a single mom. She has manic depression. And for me, I really needed to find a way to work through the chaos that was my early life experience. And I always held on to these visions I had right when I was going to sleep, which is really interesting because right at that moment when you rest your head on a pillow, that's when you can really think about your day or imagine whatever's happening the next day. But as a child, I would see myself living in London or one day going to an Ivy League university. And that kept me going despite what I noticed around me. And for me, that was something that was very nourishing. I would say in your language, restful. It really did relax everything, my nerves. Fast forward decades, I became a mom. And when I became a mom, I didn't have those glorious put my head to the pillow moments as frequently and consistently. Anyone that's listening with children, like, you get it, like sleep, what is that? And when I found myself with no sleep, I'm a mom of 3 little boys. I also found myself not as excited about what was possible for me in terms of what's next. Now I'm a mom, and it's what does that look like for me? Because my experience as a child, it looked chaotic. So I wanted something that was more wonderful, more exciting, more stable. And that was when I began my journey. It was okay. I remember as a kid having these visions of where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, and that excited me. That was a source of energy for me. So as a mom, sleepless mom, I was like, okay, I endeavor to find that again. And that was like the genesis of my book. I was like, okay, how can I get back to that place where I see an exciting, compelling, moving future for me beyond being a mom, also as an entrepreneur, also as a partner, a wife? Like, how is it that I can choose my best life when my options came from my imagination that was currently asleep? So that was the beginning of the journey in the writing of my book.
I love this so much because I feel like too often we tell our imagination to shut up because I don't know how that's going to happen. So you get these thoughts and you automatically go to the impossibility of what you're imagining. And so I want us to dive a little bit first just into the concept of your imagination being fertile. What do you mean by that?
So, fun fact, I love talking to strangers. So, of course, when I came back from Australia, where me and my family were living for some time, I went to South by Southwest here in Austin, where I'm based. And I was sitting next to a copywriter, and I asked him, I said, I need to come up with a title for my book. And so he basically coached me while we were waiting for the speaker to talk. He said, okay, write 2 columns. Write everything that you can associate with being a mother. And then the next one, everything that you associate with the word imagination. Those were my key concepts. And so for me, I was thinking diaper blowout, and I crossed that one out. I was coming up with all these different bottles, whatever. But then fertility and being fertile popped up alongside imagination. And it was like one of those moments where I was like, that's it. So a fertile imagination has the ability to cast a vision that you have never seen before in reality, but in the reality of a mother in your circles, in your ancestry. So it's something that you just don't associate with being possible for a mom. And that's why I was like, okay, that's it. It's not just an active imagination, because active kind of implies that it's not like realistic. It's a little Willy Wonka. But no, this is super practical. This is, I have an idea in my mind's eye, and I'm not going to tell it to shut up. I'm actually going to pay attention to it, because if you don't pay attention to your imagination, just like a kid, they get mad and then they go back to sleep. Not a kid so much, for your imagination. And then I'm going to do something with it, and I'm going to enlist other people to help me. So there are parts in terms of like how you get reconnected with your imagination, which I'm happy to share.
Yes, I would love for us to go deeper into that, because once someone does open the door to their imagination and they start having these visions and dreams and thoughts and processes about what is possible, whether they believe that it's probable or not, but what is possible, the things that maybe their desires or their wants, once they start moving in that direction, what's the next step? Where do you go after you get the initial imagery?
Absolutely. So the initial imagery, definitely, that's the moment that you know that you have reawakened your fertile imagination, right? So there's three parts to it. And it's really interesting, Dr. Saundra, because I really do feel like there's parts of your book that are like, okay, yeah, that's the prerequisite, right? So I mentioned the whole like sleep, which by the way is one of the kinds of rest that we might want to prioritize in our lives. The one thing that has been sleeping for the most part as a parent, let's imagine, is our imagination. So you do have to do that reawakening process, which does include sleeping. It might include mindfulness. It might include like self-reflective journaling, right? To get to that place where there's a stillness so that you can actually hear the ideas that are in your mind's eye. Then you play with that idea. So that's the next step. So playing with this idea, let's imagine, for instance, that you have a business idea, right? So you want to create some sort of coaching practice and you're excited about this idea. So how would you play with this idea? You play with this idea by talking to potentially different people who could use your services, but bring different perspectives to the table. Why is that important? So playing with anything, I think you need to be in a flow state to actually really play with something. So that's one side of it. And it also insinuates that you're in a growth mindset. You're learning. This is foreign. This is unpredictable. And so that lets you really take this idea in several directions so that you can listen to your body, whatever signs your body is giving you in terms of the right direction for you. And what I have found for a mom is that might vary depending on your season of motherhood. It might vary in terms of the resources that you have. But the one consistent in terms of moms is that you probably have a child right under your nose. And guess what? You can play with your child. You can even enlist your child to help you clarify your idea because adults are complicated. We're too complex. They can simplify our ideas. And that's a competitive edge. And that's the second part of this process, right? So reawaken, play with the idea. The third part is the one that requires, I think, a lot of bravery. And that is communicating with another human being your idea. And here's the thing, rejection comes up, right? Like that fear, embarrassment comes up, or even the thinking of, oh my goodness, I just told them what I really want to do, and now I have to actually do it. And I think that piece is the one that matters the most. It's just if an idea in your head is a wasted idea, and I write about that in my book. I interviewed so many people with brilliant ideas, screenwriters, a Muppet from Sesame Street, like legitimately, like the guy that played the Muppet, obviously. Although I will interview a puppet if I'm given the opportunity. But I interviewed so many people, even the CMO of GE, the former CMO, Beth Comstock. They all use the same concept of, okay, here's an idea. Let me play with it in an unexpected way, and let me tell other people so that we can execute whatever it is that's in my mind's eye. So it adds value to the world.
When someone is in that playing stage of this, so they've taken the vision, they've moved to the next step, it's been awakened. Now they're going to step over into playing around with, and I loved how you described that. One of the things I see happens very often for people is that when they're in the play state, because it's so unstructured and it's foreign and it's new, that tends to be the time when imposter syndrome pops up. Because it's, I don't know what I don't know, and somebody's going to find out I don't know. And it tends to be very limiting for a lot of people. I would imagine quite a few people who are trying to step into the fullness of their imagination may even get stuck at this play stage because it doesn't feel like you are in control. What would you say is to someone who may feel like they're in that imposter stage?
I feel like you were reading my presentation slides I was doing right before, because I literally was talking about imposter syndrome and how I had to come up with my own method in order to even write my book, as an example, right? So it's a very vulnerable process, putting your words out there and then having them like almost concrete. So like you can't edit it like a landing page or a website. So imposter syndrome for me, what I have helped people do is, okay, I have a method called the ACE method. And so A stands for asset. So you can actually consider your imposter syndrome as if it were an asset to you. And I've learned this being an entrepreneur for the last 13 years. So chances are, if you do not have experiences in a particular market or in a particular sector, you might actually bring, go figure, a fresh perspective to that market or sector. And chances are there are problems that have yet to be solved because everybody is coming at them in the same exact way. So you can use imposter syndrome as an asset. And the way that you would think practically about using this method, if you have this idea in your mind, is literally you just think to yourself, okay, I'm going to get imposter syndrome. Like I have really made peace with that. And I ask my clients who are moms to make peace with that because, for example, I helped someone that had 30 years of experience, has her doctorate, is a very nicely tenured professor at a university, and she still has imposter syndrome. So let's work it out. So use it as an asset. That's what the A stands for in the ACE method. C would be, let's say that using it as an asset doesn't come naturally to you. It feels awkward or fake it till you make it-ish, right? So maybe you just enlist someone else in your community and you like dare yourself to do something and they dare themselves to do something and you hold each other accountable. So I call that courage in community. And some of the people I've gotten on my podcast, I've had to do that. I've been like, I'm trying to get Beth Comstock, who I mentioned a little earlier. And I know that you're trying to talk to the head honcho at another organization. Can we just do it together, respectively, not like literally locked arms? Although you can. And then the E is really about evidence. So let's just say you have you have imposter syndrome. So let's say the asset and thinking about it as an asset didn't work, or let's say you didn't find anyone to hold you accountable. The third option that has worked for me and my clients is think about the evidence that you have that supports the fact that you've somehow experienced the same exact challenge or situation. And I always think in terms of senses. So is there something that looks like, smells like, feels like, all the above to what it is that you're trying to accomplish at this point? And so those are three different ways that you can really look at imposter syndrome when it hits, because it will hit. And again, to go back to the fact that as a mom, for example, a competitive edge, which hasn't been called a competitive edge for a lot of working moms, is the fact that I have children in my house. Everything is new to them. I need to look at my children and say, you know what? They weren't so hard on themselves when they didn't know how to walk and they kept falling. Or you know what? Yeah, it's new to them too. And it's made me a more compassionate mom as well. So the more courageous I am, the more new things I try, and the more that I have to confront imposter syndrome, the more open I am when my kids don't get something right away or they're struggling. And I think it's a better approach to give ourselves that grace than to feel bad about a very natural feeling, imposter syndrome.
Yes, I think we really do have to get to that place where we give grace to our kids very easily, but then we're also giving it to ourselves as we are growing and learning and stretching ourselves and stepping out of our comfort zone. I know a lot of the work that you do is with women who are building out businesses or founders of organizations or nonprofits, and they're taking steps into new business avenues. You've developed something called the Imagination to Impact to Income method. What is that?
Here's the thing. I would say when it comes to being a mom and it comes to having ambitious dreams, they're possible. However, we have to approach them differently than someone who might not have the same obligations, and also than someone who might have a more certain life experience, to say the least. So I have 3 kids, and I think about my kids almost like mathematical. I can't even say it, but like probability and permutations, right? So each child that I have has his own variables. So that means I'm on my toes. So that means that if I go and I launch a business or I put out a new source of revenue, I have to think about it with a nimble mind. And that comes from my imagination, my ability to consider different scenarios, my ability to think expansively. The same idea that a mom would have in terms of how to work out the logistics of a very complicated day with multiple children and multiple places to go. Same thing is what I would use in terms of thinking about the best business for you. So that would be imagination, and it starts there. You have to start as a mom founder from the position that it doesn't need to look like everyone else's business, and it doesn't need to look like every other mom in my family's life in order for both to be good for me, good for my family. So imagination is the first part of that method, and this is more for someone with a business. The second part is impact, and this is all about focus, because as a mom, you have a slither of time in order to execute on an idea or whatever. So what does that mean? That means that we have to really squeeze out the juice out of every single thing that we do. So that means that we have to figure out, like, what's that one thing that's really going to move the needle, and how can we, I don't know, I don't have a better phrase for it, but how can we hit it hard during the time that, between the time that I drop my child off, as an example, and I pick up my child. So that's impact, and that's about focus. And I know that as moms, we are distracted a lot. And so it's something that is so important if you want to be a very successful entrepreneur. The third part is income. So we're not doing this for nothing. We're doing this also not just for revenue. And I think that's a really important point, because if you're building out a business, sure, you could have oodles of revenue and pay oodles and thousands of dollars in meta ads, but I'd rather not. I'd rather have a profitable business as opposed to just like a lot of revenue. And so when I think about these three pieces, the imagination to the impact to the income method for a mom founder, I see it as a better alternative than just do whatever I can, as little as I can, in order to just survive my day. Like, I really see it as critical to thriving. And behind all of this is the idea that the only way that I have been successful in my business and my podcast is through building and focusing on profitable relationships. And that is the work that I do with my clients. And when I run them through this method, not that we run, although we can, what we do is we really focus on how can we think expansively about building out the right relationships that are going to make the greatest impact in terms of our lives. Like, it's not transactional networking, for example, that I sell, or coming up with some old school like happy hour events for moms. Like, who's got the time or the patience for any of that, or who has the high heel shoes either. So I think it's really about thinking expansively about any business that you have, realizing that there is going to be something that will maximize your impact, and then making sure that you earn income out of the entire equation, because we have an MROI, and it's my mother return on investment. And it's different because it includes the time spent away from my kids. And so that's why I think about it in that fashion.
We've been chatting with Melissa Llarena. She is the author of Fertile Impact, a guide to stretching every mom's superpower for maximum impact. And Melissa, I want to make sure people know how to connect with you and how to get in touch with you if they need coaching in this area or want to go deeper into understanding how they can, as a mom who wants to continue to have their children as one of their priorities, also step into those areas of imagination that they awaken.
Absolutely. So head on over to my website, fertileideas.com. You can absolutely grab a free chapter of the book, Fertile Imagination. You can even take a quiz there if you want to see if your imagination is up to snuff or if you might need to reawaken it. And I would invite anyone that is listening to check out the Mom Founder Imagination Hub. It's available everywhere that this podcast is. So definitely just go ahead and scoot on over and follow me there.
Excellent. And I will link in the show notes to your website as well as to your book, as well as I'll link to our conversation that we had together on your podcast so people can check that out as well. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saundra. Bye, everyone. Definitely reach out to me. Love anyone that is Dr. Saundra's listener is a friend of mine. So
awesome. Until next time, everyone, live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally.